that I have been dying to get on my podcast. I feel like he's been on everybody and their mama's podcast, but my podcast. So now it's my turn today. Took us a second to get everything set up, but now here we are. You ready? Okay, so
Already.
today we're going to be talking about a new option for testosterone replacement therapy that is taking on the HRT community by storm, and it is so cool to see. Being a practice that does a lot of hormone replacement therapy, I very much pride ourselves on is we offer all the options. And when I heard about this option, we do a lot of business and work and education through the New BioAge Network, Leonard and Frank. I thought it was really intriguing. I'm like, man, let me see what happens after a bit longer. And so finally, enough feedback. I'm like, all right, I'm going to try it on myself. So I am very proud to say that I've gotten to utilize this product for 2 to 3 months, and the lab values and my own personal experience. So we'll get into that. But today I have Mr. Shalin Shah, CEO of Marius Pharmaceuticals. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay. So before we get into the products or the product, can you first talk about why testosterone, and why has this been so important to you as far as helping with getting the black box warning labels off of testosterone, and why testosterone, and why you?
So it goes back. It's a good story. It goes back probably about 10 years. I've been involved in the testosterone space. So this drug that was in development came across my desk, and again, it piqued my interest. Just again, you hear a lot about testosterone, and there's a lot of. I mean, frankly, it's a mixed bag, right? There's the good stuff and what people really focus on or should focus on, and then the stigma, the steroids, baseball, right? So these things kind of popped out, but again, I just generally interested in health and wellness said, okay, let me get my testosterone checked. Let's see what this number is, and just sort of started peeling back the onion. I was actually 30 at the time, and I went to my doctor, and he's like, why do you want to get this tested, right? Something that most guys probably still encounter is just why. And I just said, look, I want to know. This is important, and it's just like any other blood marker. So he agreed, and lo and behold, it came back borderline low, right? And so maybe I was about 300 at that time, 30 years old, generally healthy, pretty fit, eat well, etc. And I just said, well, that's weird. What's going on here, right? So I kept digging and digging and digging. And this was around the time that the FDA did put a cardiovascular risk warning on testosterone, right? Looked into the studies, saw that they were debunked, talked to all the experts, globally, essentially, and came to the conclusion that this is actually cardioprotective.
Right.
What is going on, right? So I think it was really that moment because it was so counter what the consensus was at that time, and just as a professional, you just kind of when you find something that people don't know, you kind of dive in and really sort of get obsessed with it. So that's really what started, and since then the data has continued to come out how positive testosterone is
Right.
on every processy in the body, right? Like there's an androgen
Yes.
receptor on every organ in the body. So it's there for a reason. It's
Right.
and you need it. And again, the studies have been so positive. So as we've gotten more and more into this, as we took Kaisertrex through phase 3 development, as we got it approved by the FDA, as we saw interesting things like our free testosterone effect, which is outsized compared to what we knew at the beginning. That's why it's frankly turned into such a passion project, because not everybody knows, even to get your levels checked, how important of a metabolic hormone is, like the detrimental effects if you're deficient, right? Everybody knows vitamin D, but
Right.
how many people really understand testosterone to this metabolic degree? So again, it's just compounded and compounded, and we've enjoyed working with practitioners like yourself that are spreading the message, educating, so we can fix this problem.
Right, right, absolutely. So I think it's so interesting how many patients don't realize what testosterone does in the body. And historically, testosterone has always been touted the male hormone, right? And estrogen has always been touted the female hormone. And I think the first place we actually met was at the longevity conference in Miami, and I was presenting on testosterone replacement in women. And one of the facts that most people don't know is women actually have more circulating testosterone than they do to estrogen. When you normalize them out to the equal parts of measurement, we have more testosterone than we do E. And so for me, just as this is your passion project, I'm like, women need damn testosterone, okay? And we're gonna give it to them. So let's jump into why, can you talk through maybe some of the common conditions? Because I know you've done a lot of research on this. How, like the common conditions that we see testosterone can improve from most common things that we see people in the clinic for.
Right. So most people are showing up because of, say, general fatigue and libido. These are two of the biggest ones. And especially if you think about the male side, just being a little bit more conscious of it, right? More on the libido, right? Like that's when a guy probably runs to the doctor, because out of all health conditions, he's got to solve for that, because that has its own implications. So those are generally some of the top line things that come up. But, as testosterone is related to muscle mass, right? So the inability to put on muscle mass, or the greater propensity to have fat around your midsection, right? So the fat metabolism is not working as well.
Right.
I think other ones that are really important that people that show up but maybe kind of fly under the radar are things like your insulin sensitivity, right? So, type 2 diabetics have a 40-50% comorbidity rate with testosterone deficiency, and frankly should be one of the first places that show up for testing and then treatment, right? Again, I will preface, Kaisertrex is only indicated for men with low or no testosterone due to certain medical conditions. Like, none of these are indications, but I think testosterone as a molecule has clearly been proven to have effects across brain, heart, bone, muscle, liver, pancreas. I mean, you can get to, beta cells and talk about the cellular function and mitochondria.
Right.
There's no shortage of influence of this hormone.
Right. And I think what's so interesting is I love testosterone. I love replacing it in both men and women. But let's not forget, it's not a panacea of that's the only option. And I think that's where working with practices who really focus on cellular medicine, longevity medicine, to make sure that all the systems are operating, in line together. Not only that, for us, looking at, I'm giving you testosterone, let's make sure that the metabolites are going into the different pathways that they're supposed to. So let's say you have a patient, male patient, they come in, only because I know how the female situation goes, and they come in and the doctor says, oh, hey, your testosterone levels are normal, but they're exhibiting those symptoms: brain fog, soreness, I need an afternoon nap, my libido is crap, I'm irritable, I'm angry, my kids are on my nerves, all these things. What should the next step be?
So two important points there. So this whole concept of normal, I think we really need to correct for, because the lab ranges for testosterone are so wide, right? From generally let's say 300 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. Some societies have taken down this normal range even to like 268 or even lower. And this wasn't the case, over the last couple of decades. That numbers continue to drop because of, a population. The lab references are basically indicative of a sick population. Yeah. So this concept of normal is really warped today. And I would not take, if I'm a patient, I would not take an answer, oh, you're normal, you're fine, like don't worry about it, as an answer. I would keep digging and push your practitioner or find another practitioner. That's one. I think the second thing to think about as these people are told they're normal, or these patients told they're normal, is look at your free testosterone. So SHBG, a protein that binds to testosterone, makes it unusable, and effectively you can use that, when you equate down to free T, which is the actual amount that you can use in your body, usually around 2% of your total T. Free SHBG levels have been increasingly high in our population as well, both, again, and this spans younger to older males. So the amount of free testosterone that we actually have as a ratio has also been coming down. So for example, again, and I'm not a doctor, but I look at a lot of labs because people share these things with me. I saw, an older man, this was just this week, his total T was 900, but his free T was like 7. So, and his SHBG is over 100, right? Mm-hmm. So clearly that equation is not in line. And so again, I think when you talk about those symptoms that are presenting, look at SHBG, look at free T, because there's usually much more to that story than that total T, and that can be driving a lot of the symptoms that the patient may be having.
Absolutely. And, you know, on the longevity side, functional medicine side, some of the most common causes of driving up a high sex hormone binding globulin can be if you are not eating well, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not recovering well, if you walk around in stress all the time, insulin resistant, you know, all kinds of things, medications, you know, there's so many reasons why SHGB can be elevated, which I don't think a lot of people realize, and I don't think a lot of practitioners really understand that ratio, just as you mentioned to it. When you're saying we're talking about SHUB, what would you say is the ideal blood panel that someone should consider before starting testosterone replacement therapy? I want you to kind of hit on the men, and I'm going to throw in some of the female stuff as well.
Absolutely. So, and I'm a big fan of advanced diagnostics, comprehensive diagnostics, right? The more, I mean, you know, when I show up at the doctor, I'm usually taking anywhere from like 12 to like 15 tubes, right? So they definitely think I'm crazy, but at a minimum, which I think, again, this goes back to testing. Like I want to make the barriers low for guys to go out and get tested, as low as possible. So at a minimum, you really want to be thinking about total T, free T, SHBG, LH and FSH. Those are really interesting, especially with Kaisertrex, as these, you know, stay in the normal range. Yes, you look at PSA as a safety marker. You look at hematocrit, and you could look at things, you know, like estradiol, if you also want to understand what's happening there. But pretty much at a minimum, that's what you want to cover, so you understand really what's happening with your feedback loop.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things, and I know we're going to get into it, one of the things that I was initially very nervous about is when I heard oral testosterone, all I could think was first pass of the gut. Oh my God, your liver enzymes are going to go up. Let's talk a little bit about what is Kaisertrex and how is it broken down that is different than what, like a birth control pill. Let's talk a little bit. Well, number one, what is Kaisertrex and how are the pharmacokinetics of it different?
So we refer to Kaisertrex as next generation oral testosterone because previous, again, you know, as you mentioned, this liver toxicity is the first thing running through most practitioners' minds, and that was the case with old methyl testosterone. Actually, the first testosterone synthesized was put into an oral form, and again, it was liver toxic. So we have probably, I don't know, 7-8 decades worth of like clinical belief that, okay, testosterone is toxic to the liver, which is true via these old methods. Kaisertrex next generation oral is absorbed lymphatically. So that means it is going through the small intestine and it does not get absorbed by the liver and cause liver damage whatsoever. So this was kind of, I think, the secret code, if you will, right? I mean, we know oral medications have way higher adherence, higher adoption, et cetera. So if we think about the problem that is testosterone deficiency, 25 million men, again, throw in the female side too, 25 million plus. I mean, you have 50 million women in menopause. So this population could be reaching well north of 50, 75 million in aggregate if we look at both sexes. But we know oral is really the only way to solve this thing at scale. Again, Kaisertrex lymphatically absorbed through the small intestine. It looks, I wish I had one here, I would put it on the camera. It looks like a fish oil capsule.
Yeah, it's little.
Yeah, it's a fish oil capsule effectively. And the key secret sauce in Kaisertrex is that it uses phytosterols. So these are also, used as heart health supplements, used as food additives for again, heart health. We use it for bioavailability of the testosterone undecanoate. And it's short acting, right? So at the end of the day, Kaisertrex is the most closely mimicking your natural circadian rhythm. At the end of the day, the drug is effectively flushed from your system. So it lets your body return to that baseline state. And then what we're seeing is that the pituitary stays active, right? It's still signaling to the body because you don't have all this exogenous testosterone floating around for days on end like you do with like an injection for example.
Sure. So the male dosing typically is done twice a day, correct? And
Correct.
from my understanding, it is dosed in the morning and then it's also dosed in the afternoon. So can you talk about, let's say a patient comes in, they want to start Kaisertrex, how soon will they notice the benefit? Is it like day one we take it, or does it have to build into the system?
Good question. So since it's short acting, it's technically in the blood, within hours. How the androgen receptors absorb and respond could be an individual response, but anecdotally, we've seen patients come back to us and share that they've felt Kaisertrex on day one, right? We for in terms of testing the levels per our label, they test after 7 days. So even after 7 days, that is enough to potentially titrate if you need to, but that shows how quickly it's in the system. I think the symptomatic effects, again, vary
Right.
per individual, but we've anecdotally seen them happen very quickly. We like to guide to, give it a little time, right? Like let your body readjust to this new state, and that's when you kind of want to judge how it's helping.
I think one of the most fascinating pieces of Kaisertrex and where I see it fitting into our practice is our younger male population who maybe they're not sure if they've completed their family. Maybe they have, but they're not ready to commit to maybe a more committable therapy. Can you talk a little bit about how the luteinizing hormone and the FSH is kind of impacted a little differently than your traditional methods? I think that's so fascinating.
Yes, so this is one of the most interesting things, I think, post even our approval, and we're continuing to study this, and I think there's even more work to be done. We are running a fertility study at Baylor, Baylor is running an investigator-led study, I should say, and that's done by Dr. Mohit Khera. The initial data, some of it's been presented in an abstract and shows, sperm levels remaining normal for 80% plus of the participants, which is really cool. But yeah, at the end of the day, your LH and FSH are staying in normal range. And this is across doses. So when we look at blended doses from our phase 3 trial, LH and FSH stay in normal range. And I think, for younger patients, why this is, again, like as you mentioned, why it's so important is people are really concerned about lifelong commitment to TRT, obviously fertility, and so forth. So this is potentially an option because I'll use the an analogy like it's a factory, right? So versus you see sometimes injections, those numbers go to zero, right? Totally undetectable. The factory is shut down. In this instance, the factory is turning off some of the equipment, sending home some of the workers, but still running. It's keeping things going. So I think you can look at it this way. Which one's easier to start back and get to full capacity? A half-running factory or a factory that's been totally down, the bolts and chains are on it and you got to really dust off everything to kind of come back. So that is the way that this is starting. For us, I think from a research perspective, what is next is even looking at things like intratesticular testosterone levels and even going further down this hole to understand what those impacts are and looking at some potential, whether it's Kaisertrex as monotherapy or you look at co-therapies as well that can really help the entire system, right? Like, again, as you know, this cellular medicine, like, it's not just one tool in the toolbox.
Right.
You've got a couple things that you can modulate and potentially see better outcomes.
Right. The other thing that I find really fascinating is the testicular volume size. Actually, there's not a testicular volume shrinkage. And I think I read a study actually last week, and it says when men are on TRT, you can expect, I think, like 13% volume loss. And so, was that something that you knew was going to happen, or it's like, oh, that's a nice
side effect, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Because we had no reports of testicular atrophy in
Yeah.
our study, and anecdotally, again, we do not hear it often. Honestly, that 13% kind of surprises me. I would think, patients who are on testosterone injections, a lot of them are probably on super physiological doses, that the shrinkage might be more, right? Like that's why they take HCG and whatnot, because, I mean, I don't know if I noticed 13%,
Yeah.
but 50% for sure.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think again, it's one of those things that we discovered later, and
Right.
but again, further, we want to do more work around it because again, it's a
Yeah.
concern for a lot of men today.
Yeah. I like, as someone who loves to read a lot about the research of all the little bit things with testosterone, like I feel like Kaisertrex has opened like a whole new door to shit we didn't even know that was possible, but like, oh my God, it's possible now. Let's talk a little bit about one of the most common side effects we see with men on testosterone, and lifestyle, and weight and all these things have a lot to play with it. But it's a process called aromatization, right? So that is where testosterone is converting into estrogen. Are you seeing much of that with Kysotrex? Is it about the same as what you would get with like maybe injectables, less?
So yeah, I won't compare it to injectables, but we have in our trials, we had no patients go on aromatase inhibitors. There was zero in anastrozole use, and the estrogen number stayed basically in line. If there was a slight rise to match the testosterone levels, but there was no outsized increase in estrogen in our patients across the trial. So yeah, again, that's a I think a function of physiological ranges on a daily basis that match your circadian rhythm,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Everything comes back to that daily rhythm. And if you can keep that in a physiological range, you are going to avoid typical testosterone side effects.
Yeah. So we have practitioners who listen to this podcast and patients. So one of the things that I think is really interesting to understand is on-label testosterone shots is typically dosed, one injection every 14 days, which to me is like the most horrible thing on the world, right? Because it's like, woo, you go up and then you fall down. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you see me do like a bell curve with my hand. The problem though is that is not normal physiology. When you were 16, your body wasn't like, okay, Johnny, it's Sunday. Let's go ahead and spit it out for the next 2 weeks. That's just not normal, right? So when you get a big bolus like that, you're more likely to run into erythrocytosis, which is where we see a rise of red blood cells and your hematocrit will go up. We see a rise of aromatization. We see a rise of liver function tests. When you're doing a daily physiologic dose, you're not going to be seeing a lot of those side effects. So one of the things that we actually see in our practice when we do testosterone shots in men, we actually have them do it sub-Q twice a week. And the management of it is minimal because they don't have a lot of those side effects. But for those guys or girls who don't like shots or don't want to make this huge, like, oh God, it's in my body commitment, I think Kysotrex is a great option for those patients. I really, really do. So I think that's great. What would you say, like, top 3 myths that you hear about testosterone replacement therapy?
Top 3 myths, and there's quite a few that we're
There's so
working on
many. There's
addressing,
literally
right?
so many.
I think two of the biggest ones to that patients, and I mean even providers, right? You'd be shocked. I'll tell you the stat after I say the myth, but I think two of the biggest ones are still around cardiovascular risk and prostate cancer risk, right? And the label, this was actually just it was actually while we were at COM
I
in
know.
late February that I got an email saying, hey, like it was the FDA saying this label change is occurring. Please make these changes to Kysotrex, et cetera. But so that was, so that's been corrected per se now. But again, we know it takes so much time to then go and educate the public, both providers and patients, on this new thought process, right? So we did. So what's interesting is we did a survey on primary care docs maybe a month ago or so, and 84% didn't know that the black box came off testosterone products,
That
right?
does not shock me. That does not shock me at
Yeah,
all.
it's just so much work. Again, even WHI, right? Like 23 years ago, 24 years ago, right? And you're still fixing the mistakes of that blundered, news release. So, cardiovascular risk is up there, and then prostate cancer too, right? Prostate cancer, and there's been great data, and then including Traverse, that continued to show and prove that there's no prostate cancer association with testosterone. But originally, this came from a study in 1940 that had 3 participants. One was female, so there was 2 males, and again, 2 older males. One got prostate cancer, like so many do. No controls, no nothing, but that spurred. Again, we're talking about now 80 years of prostate cancer concern, and
Yeah.
and it's really I talked to a lot of urologists, and it's unfortunate for especially the guys that have been post prostate cancer, right? Like, so they've gone, ADT, to the max, everything's fine. But then, generally urologists say, all right, you're fine, you're not going to die. But nobody steps in and then manages these guys. So their
Right.
testosterone's in the tank, but nobody's really treating them.
Yeah.
So that's an unfortunate byproduct of this whole dynamic.
Yeah. So you brought up the next topic, which was the Traverse trial and the black box warning. That happened when we were at Calm. So what does it mean and what changed?
So, kind of back to when I got involved in this, you know, we knew the cardiovascular risk was not real. It took the Traverse trial being mandated, 5,000 patients, double-blind, placebo-controlled, the biggest randomized trial in
RCT.
testosterone history. Yeah, to then show what most people already knew. I think what this means now is that the conversation firmly shifts from is this safe to how can it benefit us.
Right. Right.
And that's what we can focus on every day. So again, I understand the need for research, and maybe we're going to do our own KaiserTrek specific research. But what I think is good, actually, and this is not political by any means, but the new administration and HHS, for preventive health, I think there is a lot of good that can happen. There's logic that's going to happen when it comes to clinical trials and data and sort of gold standard science, right? So these are the two words that I hear most often out of, and I think the new head of the FDA honestly is spot on, right? I mean, this is a Hopkins guy. He knows what he's talking about. I don't think there's a lot of controversy there. So I think now we have the opportunity to combine better research plus all the real world data that we actually know, right? Again, like all these statements that we make of testosterone as a molecule and insulin sensitivity, or as it relates to tau proteins or endothelial function, right? Like these are not guesses. We know there's an impact. So I think we can combine all of that known with the right research still going forward and get to solutions for patients faster.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. About a week after Calm and the black box warning got removed, I got a message from one of my patients. His hematocrit had gotten a little bit high. And so, I had said, okay, let's have you, get phlebotomized and we'll check it again. I check their iron and their ferritin. And it's maybe once a year that I have to have a guide do this. Anyway, so of course he sends me a message. Well, my primary care said, I need to come off this testosterone because it's going to give me a heart attack. And I said, well, unfortunately, he's wrong. But let me send you some research. And I said, and if you can print this and send it to him, that would be great. So I sent him the Traverse trial, and then I sent him the big media splash about the black box warning being removed. And I put on there, if you have any further questions, I'd be happy to discuss them. He did not call me, just so you know. I get my cell phone number. Did not call me. And so I was talking to my male patient, his wife, because she's also a patient of mine, and she gets so mad. She's like, "Why don't more doctors know this?" And I think there's a lot of reasons. To be honest with you, primary cares, God bless them, they're in and out in 10, 15 minutes. Number one. Number two is to stay up to date on like every research article that comes out. It's a lot of work. Like I always say, it's expensive to be smart, and by expensive I mean the time you have to dedicate to your craft. There's other reasons. There's lots of other reasons, but unfortunately, for those of us who have been able to step out of, like, I don't take insurance for care. We're a direct pay model situation. I can spend all the time in the world with my patient, educating them on research, telling about the latest conference I went to, explaining them about Xiaolan Shah and he's changing the world about testosterone and how cool this is going to be. And unfortunately, the traditional doctors, they don't have that opportunity. And I don't know if it's because they don't just have the time, they don't want to, who knows what it is. But it was like, I was like, oh, this is perfect timing. I actually have a study. And I'll go ahead and send this to him. He did not call, by the way. I'm still waiting on that call. But it's frustrating. It's so
maybe you'll hear
frustrating.
Maybe you'll hear the podcast.
Yeah, I'm gonna give him the link.
podcast.
I might just mail him the podcast QR code. Just listen to this episode. Okay, so good so far. Let's unpack something. Now, if you're listening, this is completely off-label. Xiaolan is not condoning anything we're going to talk about next. I'm going to share my experience as a prescriber and as someone who has gotten to experience KaiserTrek. So, testosterone in women is not FDA approved in any form, cream, shot, pellet, any of those things. So, being the little scientist that I am, and I love to try stuff out on myself before I give it to a patient, only because I always say, like, I got to talk the talk. Like, I can't just tell this patient to do something if I would not do it. So, in our practice, we offer all different varieties of testosterone to women, and we have a very, very kind of in depth blood panel that we do, and we educate them, and we explain this is not FDA approved, and these are the benefits, and these are the risks if you do nothing, right? So, we offer creams, we offer shots, we offer pellets, and now we offer Kaisertrax. Okay, so a majority of our patients in our practice, they will either do pellets, and then I would say shots is probably the second thing that we do. Creams, I just don't feel like the levels get to the optimal. Like, I don't ever hear a woman on cream say, I feel amazing, like I would hear on a pellet or shot. Okay. So I let my pellets run all the way down. So this is the test that I did, and one of our nurse practitioners is actually my provider. So I'm just gonna get my labs pulled up here. So I was looking for a couple things. I wanted to see what impact Kaisertrax had on my high sensitivity CRP markers, just to see, like, did it go up? I wanted to look at my A1C levels just to see, did it have any impact on glucose and sugar? I also looked at liver function test again, because the first thing I heard when you said Kaisertrax oral testosterone, I'm like, oh my God, first pass of the thing. Okay, so I ran all these levels and I ran my hormone levels. So I'm very excited to report liver function test stayed exactly the same. So SGOT was 17, it was 19. So if you're listening and you don't know what that means, under 40 is considered normal. Really, under 30 is where I like to see my patients. Within normal, okay? SGPT, which is another liver function test, exactly the same. It was 16 when I started. It is still 16, okay? And I was on Kaisertrax 8 weeks. Inflammatory markers. My CRP before I started Kaisertrax, or this is a HSCRP, was 0.4. At the post peak levels, 0.3. So great. That's awesome. Ideally, goal is under 1. A1C. When I started Kaisertrax, my A1C was 4.8. Post Kaisertrax, it's 4.6. My practitioner is like, are you alive in there? I'm like, I don't know. It seems to be working, you know. And then hemoglobin and hematocrit. So again, we talked about the side effect of erythrocytosis and potential, changes. When I started, and this can vary too as far as hydration and dehydration. When I started, my hematocrit was 40.9. We want that to be under 47 in females. 43.7. So still well under the optimal, reference range. Hemoglobin, if that's something that a practitioner is listening and they look at, for women, we want that to be under 16. I was 14 when I started. I was 14.7 at peak. So essentially the same. Now let's get to the good stuff if you're hanging on with me here. Testosterone. So when I have women on pellets and I'm checking a peak level, now depending on where you were trained, I always say I'm going to look at the labs, but I'm also going to look at the patient, because I can't just look at the labs. And I know I hear, especially because I train new practitioners, well, their lab said this. I'm like, well, what did the patient say? Did you ask the patient how you feel? So when I am on testosterone pellets, where I like to kind of live my range at peak is somewhere between 100 and 200. And I know that if you're like, oh my God, that's so high, it works for me. I feel great and I have no side effects. Now, you might have patients where 150, they're a pizza face and their hair is falling out. Okay, then that's not the dose for them. But for me, that works well. So my last peak testosterone level was 133. I was feeling good. I let my levels dwindle all the way down to before Kaisertrax. They came down to 32, which honestly, for some women, that might actually still might be pretty good. At peak testosterone level, so how I took this is I took my testosterone Kaisertrax capsule in the morning, and I checked it about, I think it was like 7 hours after, and I wanted to see where did peak go. It was 145, right within range, right within what is good range for me. So I'm going to tell you the differences is how did I feel? I would say comparing creams to shots to pellets to Kaisertrax, I feel for me personally the best on pellets for me because I feel strong in the gym. I will tell you, I felt definitely the cognitive piece that testosterone gives me the most with Kaisertrax. I feel like the brain focus, the concentration, it was great on Kaisertrax. I feel like what I didn't get with the Kaisertrax that I felt more with the pellets, and who knows, maybe if I did a little longer or even adjusted my dose, I might have gotten this, is the strength and moving weight in the gym. And again, for some women who don't like to deadlift and clean and press and do all this, they probably don't give a shit. Kaisertrax would work great. For me, I just felt the strength in the gym is better on pellets for me. But again, everything else, all the other symptoms, libido, sex drive, recovery, all those things, the same as it is on Kizotrex. When I compare that to shots, I didn't feel that. Even though I was doing twice a week shots, I still personally felt that roller coaster effect. Like, okay, I gave myself the shot that day, felt really good the next day, and then like day 3, I'm like, oh God, I don't feel as good. And again, these are subtle little things that where if women have never done any testosterone, they may not notice it. For someone who's been on testosterone therapy for 6-7 years as a female, I can kind of tell those differences. And fortunately for me, I can track blood work to see where do I feel the best at. So I am a huge advocate for Kizotrex in women. Again, completely off label. Where I would change my clinical practice on this is and I had reached out to you, Shelly. I'm like, I'm having trouble getting it because they're like, this is not approved in women. I'm like, yeah, I know. Is that the dosing recommendation from the pharmacy that I was using said 100 milligrams 3 times a week with a max weekly dose of 300 milligrams. If I could go back and redo this study, I think for me, and maybe I would have gotten that benefit in the gym that I was looking for, I would say maybe a sweet spot is either every other day or maybe 5 days a week. I think might have gotten me to where even Steven on pellets versus Kizotrex. But again, I was limited to what the pharmacy was okay with, what my provider was prescribing me. So I would say there's the synopsis of my study. What do you think?
No, I think it's super interesting. Obviously, you going out there on your own and saying, I want to explore this is cool in the sense to figure out what's going on. I will share that we are gearing up to file our IND on Kizotrex and exploring, dosages for female and this as an indication. We're still dialing in exactly what that indication will look like, given what we know are historical sort of FDA norms around these things. So we will be looking at, our goal is to look at everyday dosing and what milligrams can be suitable for that. So it is consistent. Again, we go back to what is the natural circadian rhythm and how do we replicate that as closely as possible. So we are going to be studying this. Again, we're gearing up for our IND. I hope to have the study off the ground by Q3, and then maybe we would get to report out Q1 of next year.
Yeah, that's great. So a couple things. I talked to another one of our pharmacist friends, and he was like, Lexi, instead of doing it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, why don't you bite it, freeze the rest of it, cut it in half. I don't know if it's the ester that it's made in, but it tasted like sewage out of the bottom of an ocean when it was cut in half. And I was like, okay. So the compliancy for women, I'm like, if I'm dying doing this, this is not going to work. So I'm like, I'm just going to do what the pharmacy said and what my prescriber is telling me, because at this point, this is my only option. The smallest dose that I had available was 100 milligrams. If you're like, okay, Lexi, what's your wish list on this? I think a 50 milligram dose would be great. Even a 30 milligram twice a day might even be a great option for women if we're really trying to mimic the circadian rhythm. Again, I know you didn't ask me. I'm just telling you this is what maybe I think might work. But it's super exciting, super exciting. And I'm so lucky to get to have the opportunity to kind of have access to have my provider order labs. And it's actually our one male nurse practitioner, and he was like all about it. He's like, yep, you're going to be the lab rat, and we're going to test this out on you. And yeah.
It's not like a foreign conversation these days, right? I think if you look at like females in general and you look at sort of the health and wellness movement of today, this is front and center, right? Perimenopause, menopause, and post, and what are the role of hormones, right? I think it's tough on the male side to obviously talk to your provider to a certain degree, but not as bad as I know what females go through, right? I talk to a lot of providers, right? I look at my own household and like what has to happen to get the care that's needed, right? So it's a huge lift, but I think people like yourself and lots in between are doing amazing things to educate, and I'm really excited about the future, right? Because I think we finally reached this point where this is going to not explode, but people are going to get the care they need.
Sure, absolutely. All right, I know you're a busy man. I know you're playing dad today. Final question: If a patient is listening and they don't see me, how could they find a provider who prescribes Kysotrex? Like, is this something that's at the regular pharmacy? How do people get their hands on it and get a
So
provider to
go to
prescribe it?
go to Kyzotrex.com, KYZATREX.com. There will be find a providers a page there, so you could potentially find a local provider. We have partnered with a number of telehealth companies, so that is also an option, and it's expanding every day, right? More and more providers are coming under, becoming aware of Kysotrex and providing this as an option. So I think it's fantastic, and you're gonna honestly take it to your provider too, right? Like, even I know sometimes it's a struggle for patients to have to go in and convince providers, but everybody's part of this movement. So, I promise I'll get you a provider after you take it to your existing provider and say, hey, you need to know about this. And and then there are pharmacies that carry it, right? We have a handful of pharmacies, that a number of the compounding pharmacies do distribute Kysotrex. They don't compound it. They can't compound it. They distribute our product. And yeah, again, otherwise reach out to us and we'll help you find a way.
Yeah. I'll make sure we'll link the Kysotrex website in the notes. So if you're a patient of, well, not ours, but if you are interested in Kysotrex and you don't have an integrated provider or they don't know about it, I will link the website there. Shalon, thank you so much for taking the time. Like I said, I know you were so busy, and then today, we've got kids. So where can people find you to learn more about the testosterone movement and the Passion Project?
So two things there. The Testosterone Project, right? So this is a nonprofit. I started probably 8-9 months ago or so, and this has three main objectives. The first is testosterone should not be a controlled substance. This is something that we're fighting actively for. Again, I do have hope with the current health movements going on that's possible, especially oral testosterone, right? You cannot abuse oral testosterone to the same degree. So that's really important, I think, to remove the stigma, increase access for primary care and across the board. Again, this never should have happened in 1990 as an Olympic outcry, but it makes no sense. Estrogen's not controlled, insulin's not controlled, vitamin D's not controlled. This makes no sense. So testosterone is a controlled substance. Second is testosterone testing for everyone over 40, right? I mean, I can make arguments for this even earlier, but I think after 40, you want to start to understand where are your levels and what's happening to them over time. Because, I mean, arguably in a male it's easier. This is the single most telling biomarker you can measure, right? Because we know it affects every process across the body. So let's make that standard so you don't have to go in and fight for a $10 testosterone test from your primary care. And the third is female approved, FDA approved female testosterone. I think we need to make this a reality. We need to reduce that stigma. We need to increase the education, right? So this is, again, a critical aspect that needs to happen. Hope you're okay there.
I've swallowed water. I'm good.
So I think female approved, FDA approved testosterone is also on our target. So the Testosterone Project, we're sort of growing by the day, whether it's provider advocates, patient advocates, et cetera. I think we can really stand up for a lot here and really help, the overall health of millions of people if we can just educate better, right?
Yeah.
So that's the Testosterone Project. You can find me at the Metabolic CEO on Instagram. I'm out there doing a lot of podcasts, doing a lot of speaking, and just sharing my personal health routines, right? Yeah. Just to encourage folks on that journey to get involved and dial in and be the best they can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you are interested in learning dosing protocols for Kysotrex, I'm actually doing two educational opportunities this summer where I'm speaking at 2 different conferences, and Kysotrex is actually in my slide deck on dosing, monitoring parameters, troubleshooting side effects, how to monitor these people. So if you're a practitioner and you're listening to this and you're like, man, that Lexi, she's always up to something exciting, and you want to learn more about this, that would be a great way, and I'll link all that stuff in the show notes as well. So it's going to be in my teaching academy this summer when I have two HRT certification courses that I'm teaching in. So
awesome. Glad to see you.
All right. Thank you so much, Shalon. I appreciate you and all the work that you're doing.
Thanks. Yep. Thanks for having me.